Chapter 10. The light came first. Not a bulb, but a seam in the wall itself, peeling apart like the lid of some vast eye. It bled a sickly aura across a slab that resembled stone, cartilage, and steel all at once. Frank couldn't tell if the material was alive or carved. It seemed to breathe in faint pulses, as if waiting for him. He hung in the air for a moment, disoriented, as though gravity hadn't yet decided whether to accept him. Then a ripple passed over his body, and unseen hands lowered him onto the slab with mechanical ease. Straps slithered from the edges, not like leather, not like rope, but segmented bands that flexed with warmth, pulsing faintly as though they had veins of their own. Frank gasped, trying to form words, but all that came was a ragged rasp. His throat felt scraped raw, as if he'd been screaming for hours already. He twisted his head left, then right, but the chamber gave him nothing to anchor to. No corners, no ceiling fixtures, only walls that curved like the inside of an egg, veined with dull purple light. Then they came into focus. Figures taller than any man, their outlines shifting like heat mirages, helmets elongated, insectile. The visors that faced him weren't glass. They didn't reflect the light. They consumed it, swallowing every gleam. The first sound broke the pit. Not a voice in any human sense, but a vibration, a collection of syllables that rattled more in his bones than in his ears. Zer Adoko, Lar Ske Wim Rathaya Ven. 3 distinct tones, layered like chords. Frank's chest quaked. His heart misfired in panic. He opened his mouth and forced air into a scream, but it came out strangled, small. Inside the helmets, the beings didn't hear his noise as distress. They heard it as data, the tremor of tissue, the pitch of muscle under stress, the measure of oxygen expenditure. Their focus wasn't on him. It was on the numbers hidden in his terror. Frank writhed once against the straps. They tightened with polite finality. The wall pulsed again. The room seemed to breathe. The voices repeated, louder now. Rathaya, Ven Rathaya, Ven. He didn't know if it was a word, a command, or a measurement. He only knew it was the beginning. The straps flexed with a warmth that unsettled him more than cold iron would have. They weren't bindings, they taught him, adjusting to the slope of his bones, the tremor of each twitch. Each segment tightened with a measured precision, pulling until resistance met equilibrium, then going still. Frank strained anyway. His wrists arched upward, his chest jerked sideways, his legs tried to kick free. The bonds shifted in sympathy, holding him as if they'd been made just for him, as if they'd studied his anatomy long before he'd lain on the slab. The scream returned, this time not strangled but torn loose from some primal depth. It ripped through his throat, raw and jagged, surprising even himself with its animal force. The chamber swallowed the resonance and gave nothing back. No hollow cry, no bounce, only bitter quiet after the violence of his own voice. The figures did not stir. The insect helmet tilted slightly toward one another. They did not move closer, did not recoil, and did not care. To them, his scream was a set of frequencies, his voice print mapped to an internal scale, his fear translated into figures. One raised a slender rod, no thicker than a pen. The tip lit faintly, not with light but with vibration. When it touched his temple, the world inside his skull rippled. The vibration spread like water struck by a stone, radiating outward in concentric waves. His scream stuttered mid-wail, catching in his throat, then collapsed into silence. Frank's jaw hung open. His chest still pumped, but his voice was gone, severed by a frequency he couldn't fight. No, he mouthed, but nothing emerged. The visor above him tilted closer. It drank in his desperation without reflection. Nothing of himself in it, no eyes looking back, no trace of recognition, simply the abyss, the kind that swallows without end. Inside the helmets, a murmur passed between them. Le Castaneau. He was hollowed, voiceless. His thoughts screamed where his body could not. Frank forced himself to breathe through his nose, shallow, stuttering pulls of air that burned on the way down. If he let the panic run too far, he'd suffocate on it. He tried to count something, anything, to anchor himself, but the count slipped loose, numbers dissolving the way dreams did when you tried too hard to hold them. His fingers strained against the straps, tendons pulling tight, fingernails scraping. For one brief second, the edge of a ridge in the material, like a seam, a weakness. Hope flared, he pressed into it. The strap responded. It softened, the ridge smoothed, vanishing beneath his nail as if it had never existed. He froze. The strap had adapted. Frank's mind jolted with a new fear. This wasn't only restraint, it was a living study. It was watching him, teaching him, and correcting itself faster than he could test it. His hands trembled, his heart hammered. The scream built in his throat again, but the vibration in his skull held him silent, a gag made of pure resonance. The walls themselves seemed to lean in. The chamber pulsed with dim veins of violet, throbbing in slow rhythm, as if the place had a heartbeat of its own. He tried to focus on that beat, to match it, but found himself drowning in it instead. They moved closer. 3 of them now, helmets crowding his view. The visors were worse up close. No reflection, no sign of anything but an abyss that refused to give him back to himself. His own face should have been there, distorted and pale, but there was nothing, simply void. One raised a device like a black conch shell, its surface iridescent, oily, as if skin and metal had fused. From its tip, unrolled filaments finer than hair, shimmering violet threads that writhed with an intelligence of their own. They unfurled until they hovered simply above his chest, swaying like seagrass in unseen current. The first filament touched him. Frank arched, expecting pain, but it didn't pierce, didn't burn. Instead, it sipped, a tug in the marrow of his bones, like something essential had been drawn up through the filament and whisked away. A coldness ran across his chest, his vision blurred at the edges. The murmurs rose around him, voices layered in dissonant chords. Ish takvra lar shuske ske uim. The words rattled through him, vibrating in his spine. He wanted to ask what they meant, to beg them to stop, but all he could do was mouth empty syllables, lips shaping soundless prayer. Inside the helmets, data scrolled. The specimen's electrical activity flared with admirable violence. Neural signals spiked. Vascular pressure surged. Indices tallied neatly, one after another. The harvest was progressing according to calibration. Frank's mind whirled. Memories fired out of order. His daughter at the riverbank, the smell of gasoline, his wife laughing in the kitchen. They burst like sparks. Random, too fast to cling to. He was coming apart, not cut, but peeled, thought from thought, moment from moment. He strained his hands again, desperate for the seam. There was nothing now, only straps that had memorized him. The visor bent lower, swallowing him whole. And in the back of his throat, Frank screamed. Frank's mind whirled. Memories fired out of order. His daughter at the riverbank, the smell of gasoline, his wife laughing in the kitchen. They burst like sparks, random, too fast to cling to. He was coming apart, not cut, but peeled, thought from thought, moment from moment. He strained his hands again, desperate for the seam. There was nothing now, only straps that had memorized him. His chest convulsed, forcing a cry upward. His throat burned, his mouth opened wide, but nothing left him. The visor stood closer until Frank could almost convince himself his own reflection was inside it. Almost a jawline, a sliver of cheek, the glint of a tooth, there for half a second, then erased as if the void had chosen to devour even the idea of his face. The blackness did not distort him. It consumed him. He wanted to turn away, to deny it his attention, but the straps forced him still. Every breath came shallow and sharp, ribs jerking upward against the weight across his sternum. His throat felt raw, the urge to scream gnawing at his insides, but no rumble left him. His voice had been stolen silence, pinned in place where noise used to live. A filament unspooled from the black conch like device, swaying in the stale air. It brushed against his sternum, and the sensation jolted him harder than pain would have. There was no sting, no cut, simply a suction deep in the marrow, as though something had been drawn out of his bones. Cold rushed through him, a hollowing chill that spread up his spine. His teeth hurt from it, his eyes watered. Frank jerked his head to the side, hoping to free himself from the device, but the straps adjusted in response. They pulled him back into alignment with an almost parental firmness, neither harsh nor gentle, only exact. The bonds weren't restraints, they were instruments. They corrected him, positioned him, and made him usable. Que l'enrue de Marset. The syllables vibrated lower than before, thrumming in his chest cavity, until his heart answered with its own erratic beat. The language wasn't speech, it was measurement. Every utterance was a chord struck against his body, a note in an equation he would never see. The helmets tilted together. Inside them, perception was nothing like vision. Frank wasn't Frank to them. He was Specimen 47. Delta, a trembling geometry on their shared grid. His endocrine surges mapped out in elegant arcs. His neural flares bloomed as clusters of light. To them, panic was not tragedy. Panic was proof. One figure adjusted the conch device, altering the filament frequency. Frank felt a second chill bloom, deeper this time, reaching into the cavity of his skull. It was as if a vacuum had formed inside his head, pulling at thoughts like cobweb strands. Memories quivered at the edges, fragile and light. He tried to lock onto something, his daughter's face, the river, but each image slid away like water squeezed through cupped hands. The more he fought to hold on to them, the faster they scattered. He was emptied, catalogued, disassembled piece by piece. Another alien extended a jointed arm, fingers impossibly long, bending in ways that ignored human logic. It touched the strap near Frank's wrist, and it tightened, not cruelly but with surgical precision, like a carpenter adjusting the last screw to keep the frame straight. The murmur rose again. Rurtha, ven. Frank's chest jerked as if the word itself had weight, pressing down on his lungs. He wanted to believe they were speaking to him, but deep down he knew the truth. They weren't addressing him. They were addressing each other, or the room, or the instruments themselves. He wasn't a participant. He was the subject. The filament retracted with a soft screech, carrying whatever it had taken into the conch. The oily surface shimmered with shifting colors, violet, green, black. Frank felt emptier than before, hollowed out. The visor dipped closer, close enough that the blackness seemed to open and swallow the world around him. Inside, there was nothing. No eyes, no soul, no recognition. Just the cold certainty that he was collected. The chamber thickened around him, air gone dense as wet wool. Frank fought for each breath, sucking in shallow gasps that did nothing to calm the fire in his chest. His bones were not his own anymore. They belonged to whatever rhythm the device dictated. The tendrils multiplied again. A forest of them uncoiled above him, finer than cobweb, glittering in shifting colors that refused to settle, violet one moment, green the next, then transparent, almost invisible, until they snapped back into sight with a pulse of light. They lowered onto his body in dozens, attaching to scalp, throat, shoulders, and wrists. Frank thrashed, convulsing against the straps, but the bonds adjusted and corrected with mechanical patience. No matter which way he twisted, the tendrils found him. The first touch on his scalp made him choke. It wasn't pain, it was invasion. The tendrils slipped through skin without breaking it, threading themselves into places they should never reach. Cold spread through his head, a hollowing chill that made his teeth chatter. The aliens spoke again. Ske uim nasa denu, denu. The language vibrated through him. It wasn't for him. It was for each other, for the devices, for the process itself. With gut, twisting certainty, they didn't even recognize him as a life. Not the way humans thought of life. He was an object, a specimen, a map to be read, a set of signals to be measured. Inside the helmets, perception was data. Each neuron spike in Frank's head appeared to them as a flash of light in a field of endless dark. His memories not as images, but as irregular waves, firing, collapsing, sparking. His rage appeared to them as red arcs. His grief was a muted line. His fight was a number in decline. They adjusted their instruments. The clamps deepened, shaking him until his bones felt like glass about to crack. Tendrils twitched in response, pulsing brighter. The murmurs sharpened. Lur kas vro lanthesh. Frank's mind reeled. Of the eagle at the river, of his wife in the kitchen, of the garage with the smell of oil and metal. He tried to cling, but the memories cracked, peeled away, stolen by the threads burrowing deeper into his head. Each recollection vanished into the conch's glimmer, filed away in alien logic. A new device descended from the ceiling, coiling downward like a snake of glass and bone. Its end flared into a crescent, delicate and sharp, dripping with faint light. It hovered above his forehead, aligning itself with his skull. Frank tried to shake his head, to thrash, to beg, but the straps corrected him. The tendrils' heavy silence gripped him. The clamp steadied him. The crescent hovered above his forehead, tilting with insect patience. Its edge wasn't metal. It wasn't glass. It was something alive, translucent, trembling faintly, as if breathing. Frank stared upward until his eyes burned from not blinking. His chest heaved, his lungs clawed at the stale air, but the resonance clamp pinned him flat, dictating even the rhythm of his breaths. The first touch of the crescent was almost tender. A warmth spread across his scalp, not heat, but a pressure like a hand resting gently on his head. Then it slid downward, and the warmth became inevitability. His skin parted without breaking, his bone opened without fracture, as if his skull had always been designed with seams waiting to be unzipped. Frank's eyes bulged wide. He tried to scream. His chest convulsed, his mouth stretched in a raw O of panic. No screams came, only the ragged fire of breath, moving with no voice behind it. Then the crescent deepened its cut. Frank felt the world tilt inside his head, a pressure like an elevator lurching down, the sense that his body had only betrayed him completely, that something essential was about to be removed. He shook again, chest heaving, throat tearing with the phantom scream, and then weight lifted. The tendrils surged upward, carrying something with them. His vision flashed white, then narrowed to a pinpoint. For an instant, he felt himself floating, torn free from the anchor of his flesh. He didn't see the device cradle his brain, but he felt the strange, wet coolness of air on tissue that had never known air. He suspended, trembling as though every thought he ever had was compressed into a quivering ball of meat. The crescent swung gently into the waiting vessel. The jar was clear, but the fluid inside glowed faintly green. The brain sank into it like a specimen dropped into formaldehyde. Bubbles hissed and vanished. Tubes latched eagerly into the jar's sides, slurping data from the folds of his mind. Frank's body spasmed once on the table, then went still. His eyes stared wide, his mouth frozen open in the shape of that last strangled scream. The aliens leaned together, visors nearly touching. Their voices blended into a single resonant chord, low and final. Vro lanthesh. Data collected. Frank's first sensation was weightlessness. Not the blissful drift of a dream or the gentle buoy of a pool, but a cold, alien suspension. His entire being hung in liquid, every nerve ending raw, his awareness compressed into a trembling knot of thought. He tried to scream. His mind bellowed, but nothing came. No throat, no lungs, no tongue. Simply the sickening realization. He was still here. The fluid pressing against him, a subtle but unrelenting cradle that turned his own existence into something obscene. It wasn't simply wet. It had a taste, a sterile bitterness that slid into the cracks of his consciousness, almost metallic, like copper leaching from old pipes. He swore he could smell it too, something sharp, acrid, and antiseptic, as though his mind itself had nostrils. That phantom stench clung to his thoughts until he gagged without a throat. "Where's my fucking body? Oh, fuck!" The thought detonated inside him, wild and jagged. He hurled it at the black, shapeless nothing that hemmed him in, but no answer came, only the gap rumble of his own voice rattling back, warped, repeating until it didn't rumble like him anymore. He searched desperately for arms to flail, legs to kick, a chest to heave with panic, but there was nothing. Only the lazy drift of thought trapped in jelly. He hated the way the liquid hugged him, hated the way it made him feel both safe and imprisoned at once, like being drowned slowly in syrup. His brain, he knew it was his brain, seemed to pulse inside its prison, a sluggish heartbeat he could feel but not command. Every flash of awareness amplified until it was unbearable. The faint gurgle of bubbles moving around him, the glass walls humming faintly with vibrations, the memory of blood rushing through veins that no longer existed. The stillness was monstrous. Frank cursed again and again, long strings of profanity that tumbled endlessly in his mind, but each syllable only ricocheted back, mocking, doubling and looping until he wasn't sure if he was thinking anymore or simply unraveling. The liquid pressed harder, the float rolled on, his identity fraying under the relentless sameness. The worst part was the drifting, that constant bobbing weightlessness like a boat set adrift on black water. He couldn't stop it, couldn't anchor himself. It was nauseating, maddening. His whole sense of self slipping with every gentle roll. It wasn't death, it wasn't sleep. It was a limbo, a cruel, lucid hell where the body was gone, but the terror remained. His awareness slammed against the jar, pressing into the unseen curve of glass as though thought itself had grown claws. The walls confining him, close and unyielding, holding him like a specimen. Every second stretched into an eternity, every moment whispering the same brutal truth. He hadn't escaped. He was still alive, still aware, still trapped.